The sun cast long shadows across Margaret Hayes' garden as she knelt among her roses, 71 years of life etched into the creases around her eyes. Her weathered hands marked by decades of pushing fabric through sewing machines carefully pruned dead leaves. The distant sound of tires on gravel made her look up, shielding her eyes against the afternoon glare. Her son Michael's sleek black Mercedes pulled into the driveway, the engine purring to a stop. Michael stepped out his tailored suit, a stark contrast to Margaret's dirt-stained gardening clothes. At 38, he carried himself with the confidence of success, an engineering degree and a high-paying job that had provided him the 3-bedroom house in the suburbs and the luxury car he drove. His wife Jessica remained in the passenger seat, tapping at her phone, her long hair falling in a curtain around her face. "Mom, I was in the neighborhood for a meeting." Michael approached with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "How are you doing out here all alone?" Margaret brushed the soil from her hands, a lifetime of politeness masking the small sting of his words. "I'm not alone, Michael. I have my garden, my sewing, my friends from church." She didn't mention the empty spaces in her evenings, the silence that had settled into the house since Robert died 3 years ago. 40 years of marriage ended with a heart attack while he was installing cabinets on a construction site. One moment he was there, hands full of calluses and cement dust in his hair, the next gone. Michael glanced back at the car where Jessica sat. "Jessica wanted to stop by too, but she has a headache. She's been asking about that card I have for your account, the emergency one." A coolness crept up Margaret's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. "Is there an emergency?" Her voice remained steady, decades of practice in keeping emotions contained. No, Michael laughed, waving his hand dismissively. "But Jessica's been managing our finances and she wanted to make sure we have access if anything happens to you. You know, just being prepared." The roses suddenly seemed less vibrant under Margaret's gaze. The emergency card, the one she'd given Michael after Robert's funeral when grief had made her contemplate her own mortality. For medical expenses, for funeral costs if something happened to her, not for everyday access. "Everything's fine with the card, Michael. It's there for emergencies like we discussed." Margaret stood up slowly, her knees protesting after an hour of gardening. Michael's phone chimed. He glanced at it, frowning slightly. "Mom, I've got to take this. Work never stops, you know." As he stepped away to take the call, Margaret looked toward the car. Jessica had finally emerged elegantly dressed in a cream-colored outfit that probably cost more than Margaret earned in a month at her small alteration shop. Her high heels sank slightly into the soft lawn as she approached designer sunglasses perched on her perfect nose, the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist catching the sunlight. "Margaret," Jessica's smile was as polished as her nails. "How lovely to see you. Your roses are beautiful." Margaret had never asked Michael or Jessica to call her Mom. Something in her had hesitated when they first married 5 years ago, some instinct she hadn't understood at the time. Now the formality of Margaret felt like a small mercy. "Thank you, Jessica. How have you been?" Jessica's eyes darted to Michael still on his phone call at the edge of the driveway before returning to Margaret. "Busy, you know how it is. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." The shift in Jessica's tone triggered something in Margaret, the same sensation she'd felt decades ago when fabric suppliers tried to cheat her on orders. A subtle recognition of dishonesty. "Michael mentioned that card you gave him, for emergencies," Jessica continued. "I was thinking it might be easier if I had one too, in case Michael isn't available and something happens with you." Margaret's hands, which had sewn wedding dresses for brides across 3 decades, remained perfectly still at her sides. "The arrangement with Michael works fine, Jessica. I don't think we need to change it." Jessica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, if that's what you prefer. I just thought it would be more practical." Margaret had spent her life reading people across sewing tables. Mothers anxious about wedding costs, teenagers nervous about prom dresses, working women needing quick alterations. She recognized the calculated disappointment in Jessica's expression, the slight narrowing of her eyes. Michael returned, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Sorry about that, Mom. Client issues never end." He glanced between the 2 women. "Everything okay?" "Just fine," Jessica answered before Margaret could speak. "I was admiring Margaret's roses." The visit ended soon after with promises to call more often that Margaret knew would evaporate like morning dew. As the Mercedes disappeared down the street, she returned to her gardening with a new uneasiness settling in her chest. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Margaret sat in her small alteration shop reviewing invoices when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and she almost ignored it. Too many scam calls these days. Something made her answer. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Hector Morales from Premium Motors. I don't know if you remember me." The name struck like lightning. Hector Morales. Not the skinny boy with sad eyes who used to come to her workshop decades ago with his mother, a housekeeper who brought clothes for mending. Margaret had taught him to read, given him used books, told him education was the only escape from poverty. "Hector, of course I remember you. How are you, son?" Warmth colored her voice. "I'm well, thanks to you, Mrs. Hayes, but I'm calling about something urgent. There's a woman in my dealership trying to buy a luxury car with your credit card. She says she's your daughter-in-law, Jessica Hayes." The air left Margaret's lungs in a silent rush. Jessica buying a luxury car with her card, the card only Michael had for emergencies. There must be a mistake. Margaret kept her voice from trembling through sheer will. "I didn't authorize any purchase." "I know, ma'am. That's why I called. When I saw your name on the card, I knew something wasn't right. She says your son gave her permission, that you're fine with it, but I needed to confirm before processing a transaction for $85,000. $85,000. The words echoed in Margaret's mind like an explosion. Jessica trying to spend $85,000 of her money that had cost 40 years of sacrifice, of pain, of going without. "Hector, don't authorize anything. Please, I need to come there. Give me the address." Margaret closed her shop, almost forgetting her keys in her haste. The taxi ride to the dealership passed in a blur of questions hammering at her mind. How dare Jessica? How could Michael give that card to her without asking? Without telling her? Had she become so insignificant that her life savings were now considered their money? The dealership gleamed with glass and bright lights, imported cars displayed like jewels in a case. Margaret had never entered such a place. Her old Toyota had been bought second-hand 15 years ago and maintained with religious care. Hector waited at the entrance, no longer the skinny boy she remembered, but a tall man in an impeccable suit. His eyes, however, remained the same, warm and grateful. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for coming," he said quietly. "She's in the office looking at paperwork for the car. I haven't processed anything." Through the glass walls of an office at the back, Margaret saw Jessica sitting with her legs crossed, looking through a catalog with a satisfied smile. The cream-colored dress she wore probably cost more than Margaret's weekly income. Her nails, freshly manicured, her hair, perfectly styled. Margaret walked toward the office with measured steps, each breath carefully controlled. When Jessica looked up and saw her, the smile froze on her face. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" Jessica's voice strained for casualness, but her fingers tightened around the catalog. "I came to see what's happening," Margaret replied evenly. "Why are you using my card? Jessica?" Jessica laughed nervously, standing to smooth her dress. "Oh, Margaret, don't worry. Michael told me I could use it. He said you were fine with it, that you wanted us to buy a new car." The lie hung in the air between them, as tangible as the luxury vehicles surrounding them. Margaret had never said any such thing, never even hinted at it. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I never agreed to this." Margaret's voice remained calm, betraying none of the storm raging inside her. "We should call Michael." Jessica's expression flickered a brief crack in her composed facade. "He's in meetings all day. We shouldn't bother him with this little mix-up." "I insist," Margaret held out her hand. "My phone is in my purse. Would you like to use yours?" Before Jessica could respond, the glass door opened and Hector entered with a tablet in hand. "Mrs. Hayes, I've prepared some documentation about the attempted transaction, for your records." Jessica's face paled slightly. "This is a private matter, sir, between family." Hector's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes met Margaret's briefly. "Of course. I'll be at the front desk if you need anything else, Mrs. Hayes." After he left, Jessica's demeanor changed instantly. "Margaret, you're making a scene over nothing. Michael and I discussed this. The card is for family use." "No, Jessica. The card is for emergencies, medical emergencies. It's connected to my life savings." "And what good is money sitting in an account doing nothing? Michael works hard. We deserve nice things." Jessica's voice hardened. "Besides, you're living in that big house all alone. You don't need all that money." The presumption stole Margaret's breath momentarily. 40 years of pre-dawn mornings of sore fingers and aching back of calculating every expense, reduced to money doing nothing that Jessica felt entitled to spend. "We should call Michael," Margaret repeated, taking out her phone. Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Fine." Michael answered on the third ring, his voice distracted. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Michael, I'm at Premium Motors with Jessica. She's trying to use my emergency card to buy an $85,000 car. Did you authorize this?" A moment of silence stretched across the line. Jessica said she was going to talk to you about helping us with a down payment, not using your card directly." Jessica quickly interjected, leaning toward the phone. "Honey, I told you Margaret was fine with it. Remember we discussed this last week." Another pause. I don't remember discussing that specific arrangement." Margaret felt a coldness settling in her chest. Michael's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't explicitly authorized this transaction, but he wasn't completely surprised either. Some conversation, some plan had existed that she hadn't been part of. "Michael, I'm taking my card back now. We'll discuss this at home, tonight." Margaret ended the call before he could respond, then turned to Jessica. "I need my card back." Jessica's face transformed, the pleasant mask falling away entirely. "You're overreacting. It's just a car. You have plenty of money you're not using." "My card, Jessica. Now." The standoff lasted only moments before Jessica reached into her designer purse and pulled out the credit card. She slapped it onto the table between them. "Fine, take it, but don't expect Michael to be happy about this." Margaret picked up the card, her hands steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I'll see you both tonight, 7 o'clock at my house." As she turned to leave, Jessica called after her. "You know, for someone who claims to love her son, you're being incredibly selfish." Margaret paused at the doorway, decades of dignity wrapping around her like armor. "Love isn't about giving someone everything they want, Jessica. Sometimes it's about saying no." Hector walked her to a taxi, concern evident in his expression. "Mrs. Hayes, are you all right? Should I call someone for you?" "I'm fine, Hector. Thank you for calling me today. You probably saved my life savings." His expression softened. "I never forgot what you did for me, Mrs. Hayes. Those books you gave me, the time you spent teaching me to read better. I wouldn't be where I am today without you." A small warmth bloomed in Margaret's chest amid the cold shock of betrayal. "You made something of yourself, Hector. I just helped a little along the way." "Sometimes a little help at the right moment changes everything." He handed her a business card. "If you need anything, please call me. Anything at all." During the taxi ride home, Margaret stared at the emergency credit card in her hand. She had given it to Michael 3 years ago after Robert's funeral. "Only for emergencies," she had told him. "If something happens to me and you need to cover medical expenses or funeral costs." The memory of that conversation, heavy with grief and worry, now felt tainted. Somewhere between then and now, emergency had transformed into family access in Michael and Jessica's minds. At home, Margaret went straight to her computer. The ancient desktop had been a gift from Michael 2 Christmases ago when he upgraded his own system. She rarely used it, except for email and occasional research, preferring the tactile nature of paper records. Now she logged into her bank account with shaking fingers. The screen loaded, showing her account balance. Where $450,000 should have been, her life savings carefully accumulated through decades of work, the number showed $202,376.42. Nearly $250,000. Gone. Margaret stared at the screen, unable to process what she was seeing. She clicked on the transaction history, scrolling through page after page of withdrawals and charges she had never made. Jewelry stores, luxury boutiques, first-class airline tickets, resort bookings, home renovation companies. The earliest unauthorized transaction dated back 8 months, around the time Michael had asked if the emergency card was working okay during a casual Sunday visit. Margaret had assured him it was safely in his possession for emergencies. He must have given it to Jessica immediately after. The room seemed to tilt slightly as Margaret scrolled through the evidence of betrayal. $250,000 of her life taken without her knowledge or consent. By her son. By the woman he had married. She printed the transaction records with methodical care, organizing them by date in a folder. The seamstress in her, accustomed to precision and order, took over as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Sort, categorize, create a record, turn chaos into something that can be addressed. The doorbell rang at 6:45. Margaret was waiting in the living room, transaction records spread across the coffee table, a cup of untouched tea growing cold beside them. Michael entered first, his expression a mixture of defensiveness and worry. Jessica followed, her face set in lines of practiced contrition that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened today," Michael began, sitting across from her. "There's been a misunderstanding." Margaret looked at her son, the boy she had sacrificed everything for, the man who now sat before her with excuses ready on his lips. "Yes, there has been. Please explain to me why $250,000 is missing from my account." Michael's face paled. "What? No, that can't be right." Margaret slid the bank statements toward him. 8 months of transactions. Withdrawals charges, all using my emergency card. "A card I gave you to use only if something happened to me," Jessica interjected smoothly. "Margaret, we never intended—" "I'm speaking to my son." Margaret's voice cut through the air like scissors through silk. "Michael, explain." Michael stared at the statements, flipping through pages with growing horror. "Mom, I gave Jessica the card, but I thought she was just using it for small things. Emergencies. Things you'd want to help us with. Small things like the $32,000 at Tiffany's, the $48,000 trip to Bali, the $65,000 kitchen renovation." Margaret kept her voice level through sheer force of will. "Tell me what emergency those addressed." Michael looked at Jessica, who had gone very still beside him. "Jessica said you had offered to help us, that you wanted to contribute to our lifestyle since we might need to take care of you someday." The betrayal cut deeper than Margaret had imagined possible. "Take care of me. I've been taking care of myself since your father died. I run my own business. I maintain my own home. I've never asked either of you for help." "But you're getting older, Mom." Michael's voice took on a pleading tone. I thought we were planning for the future." Margaret's hands, which had sewn countless wedding dresses with perfect stitches, remained perfectly steady as she pointed to the statements. "By stealing $250,000 from me without my knowledge or consent—" "We didn't steal," Jessica began. "Using someone's credit card without their knowledge is theft," Margaret interrupted. "Using it after being explicitly told it was for emergencies only is theft." Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Robert that Margaret's heart ached despite everything. "Mom, I swear I didn't know it was this much. Jessica handles our finances. She told me you were helping us out, that you had agreed." Margaret turned her gaze to Jessica, who sat with perfect posture, her expression carefully controlled. "Is that true, Jessica? Did I ever agree to help you out with my life savings?" Jessica's smile was thin and sharp as a needle. "You've always said you wanted the best for Michael, that everything you and Robert worked for was for him eventually. I was just making eventually happen a little sooner." The casual cruelty of it, the entitlement, the manipulation, stole Margaret's breath momentarily. Then a strange calm settled over her, the kind that had come when Robert died and she had to plan a funeral while her world collapsed. "I want all of it back," Margaret said simply. "Every penny." Jessica laughed, the sound brittle and cold. "That's not possible. The money's been spent." "Then you'll have to find a way to repay it. Sell things. Take out loans. I don't care how you do it." Michael leaned forward, his expression desperate. "Mom, please. We can work something out. Maybe a payment plan or—" $250,000, Michael. Money I earned with 40 years of labor. Money I save for my retirement, for medical care if I need it. For my security." Margaret's voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of every sacrifice she had ever made. "Would you have me destitute so Jessica can wear designer clothes?" "You're being dramatic," Jessica cut in. "You have this big house paid off. You could downsize, free up equity. It's not like you're going to be homeless." Margaret looked at this woman, this stranger who had married her son, and saw her only as a resource to be drained. "My home is not your ATM, Jessica." "Mom, please," Michael tried again. "We made a mistake. I made a mistake. But we're family. We'll figure this out." Family. The word hung in the air between them, laden with meanings and obligations that suddenly seemed one-sided. Margaret had always believed family meant protection, support, love, not exploitation. "Yes, we will figure this out." Margaret agreed, her voice steady. "Tomorrow morning, we're going to the bank together. We're going to report these as fraudulent transactions. Then we're going to the police station." The color drained from Jessica's face. "The police? You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." Michael stood up, agitation making him pace. Mom, you can't go to the police. This is family business. We'll pay you back, I promise. How? With what money? Margaret asked quietly. You live beyond your means already. Your father and I taught you better than that, Michael. I'll get a second job. We'll sell the Mercedes. Something. Michael's desperation was palpable now. Please, Mom, don't do this. Margaret looked at her son, not the confident engineer who had arrived earlier, but a frightened boy caught in a web of his own making. She remembered him at 5, proudly showing her a drawing. At 12, winning the science fair with a project Robert had helped him build. At 22, graduating college, the first in their family to do so. Something softened in her but didn't break. I won't go to the police on one condition. You both sign a legal document acknowledging the debt and agreeing to repayment terms, with interest. Jessica stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We don't need to sign anything. We're family. Family doesn't steal from family, Margaret replied simply. Legal documentation or police report. Those are the options. Michael placed a restraining hand on Jessica's arm. We'll sign, Mom. Whatever you need. Jessica yanked her arm away. I'm not signing anything. This is extortion. No, Jessica. This is consequences. Margaret's voice carried decades of quiet strength. I'm not a feeble old woman you can manipulate and discard. Every cent in that account carries the weight of my cracked hands, my sleepless nights, my knees ruined from hunching over a sewing machine. For 40 years I worked in conditions you couldn't imagine to give Michael a life I never had. Something shifted in the room, a realization dawning on Michael's face as he looked at his mother with new eyes, seeing not just the familiar figure who had always been there, but a woman who had endured and sacrificed. We'll sign, he said quietly, ignoring Jessica's furious glare. And we'll pay back every penny, I promise. Margaret nodded once. I'll have the papers ready tomorrow. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. After they left, Margaret sat alone in the quiet house, surrounded by evidence of her family's betrayal. The weight of it pressed against her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She thought of all the nights she had stayed up finishing rush orders, the sound of the sewing machine a constant companion, the smell of new fabric mixed with reheated coffee. Robert coming home with cement dust in his hair, but always with a smile for Michael, always with a kiss on her forehead. We're going to make it, Margaret, he would say. We're going to make it. And they had. They had saved and sacrificed and built a life better than either of them had growing up. They had given Michael everything they could, not just material things, but values. Or so she had thought. Where had they gone wrong? When had money become more important to Michael than integrity? When had he started seeing her as a resource rather than his mother? The questions circled without answers as Margaret carefully gathered the bank statements and placed them back in the folder. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight she allowed herself to feel the full measure of her grief. The next morning, Margaret woke before dawn, a lifetime habit from years of early sewing orders. She dressed with care in a lavender blouse and charcoal slacks, clothes she had made herself tailored to perfection. Her appearance had always mattered to her, not out of vanity, but self-respect. At 7:30, she called her friend Evelyn, a retired paralegal who had helped with contracts for the alteration shop over the years. Evie, I need a favor. A legal document for a personal loan repayment. Evelyn, shrewd and practical after 40 years in law offices, asked no unnecessary questions. Amount, terms, parties involved. $250,000. 5 years maximum repayment. Between me and Michael and Jessica. A pause on the line. Margaret, that's a significant amount. Is everything all right? No, Margaret answered honestly. But it will be. Can you help? I'll have something for you by 8:30. Do you want collateral provisions? Margaret hadn't considered that aspect. What would you recommend for that amount, property liens at minimum? Maybe wage garnishment clauses if they default. It felt surreal to be discussing such measures against her own son, but Margaret nodded to herself. Yes, include those. While waiting for Evelyn, Margaret made another call, to her bank. She explained the situation to the manager, requested a freeze on her account, and made an appointment for later that morning. The woman on the phone expressed concern, mentioned elder financial abuse protocols suggested involving adult protective services. Not yet, Margaret told her. Let me try to handle this within the family first. Her final call was to Hector Morales. Mrs. Hayes. His voice was warm with concern. How are you today? Managing Hector. I wonder if you might do me another favor. Something's come up with Michael and Jessica, and I could use a witness today. Someone impartial. Of course. Anything you need. Margaret gave him the details, feeling a strange sense of calm descend as her plans took shape. She had spent a lifetime solving problems. Fabric that wouldn't drape properly, budgets that wouldn't stretch far enough, clients with impossible demands. This was just another problem to solve, albeit one that cut closer to her heart than any before. Evelyn arrived at 8:15 with documents in hand, her silver-rimmed glasses perched on her nose as she explained each provision. This is strong language, Margaret. They won't like it. They stole $250,000 from me, Evie. I don't much care what they like at this point. Evelyn's eyebrows rose slightly at the uncharacteristic hardness in Margaret's voice, but she nodded. Fair enough. Do you want me to stay for the signing? Please. At 9 o'clock sharp, Michael arrived alone. His face was drawn shadows under his eyes, suggesting a sleepless night. Jessica's not coming, he said immediately. She says she won't sign anything, says it's insulting and she wants no part of it. Margaret had expected as much. Then we'll proceed without her. The debt is still valid, and as her husband, you're jointly responsible. Michael's shoulders slumped slightly as he took in the presence of Evelyn at the dining table and the legal documents spread out. Mom, isn't this a bit formal? We're family. Family, Margaret repeated softly. Tell me, Michael, when did being family start, meaning you could take my life savings without asking? He flinched as if she'd struck him. I told you I didn't realize how much Jessica was spending. I thought it was just small amounts here and there. $250,000 isn't small amounts, Michael. Margaret gestured to the chair across from her. Please sit. As Evelyn began explaining the document terms, the doorbell rang. Margaret excused herself, returning moments later with Hector Morales. Michael's expression shifted from resignation to surprise. What's he doing here? Mr. Morales is here as an additional witness, Margaret explained calmly, since Jessica chose not to attend. This is ridiculous. Michael's voice rose slightly. You're treating me like a criminal. No, Michael. I'm treating you like someone who allowed $250,000 to be stolen from me. Margaret sat down, her posture perfect, despite the ache in her heart. That money represents my security, my independence. Without it, I might have ended up dependent on you and Jessica in my old age. Is that what you wanted? Michael's face flushed. Of course not. I want you to be comfortable, to have everything you need. Except my own money, apparently. Evelyn cleared her throat. Shall we continue with the terms? The document laid out a 5-year repayment plan with monthly installments secured by a lien against Michael and Jessica's house. Any default would trigger wage garnishment proceedings. The interest rate was fair, but not generous. Michael stared at the papers, the magnitude of what had happened, what he had allowed to happen, finally seeming to sink in. Mom, I don't know if we can make these payments. Our mortgage is already... Perhaps you should have considered that before spending my retirement. Margaret interrupted, her voice steady. You have choices, Michael. Sell the house and downsize. Sell Jessica's jewelry. Return what can be returned. Find additional income sources. The same choices I would have had to make if I discovered my savings gone when I needed medical care. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Michael picked up the pen and signed each page where indicated. I'll make this right, Mom. I promise. Margaret nodded, accepting the promise for what it was. Words that might or might not translate to action. I've scheduled a meeting at the bank at 11. They've frozen my account pending investigation of fraudulent charges. Fraudulent? Michael looked alarmed. But you said if I signed you wouldn't go to the police. I'm not filing a police report yet. Margaret emphasized the last word slightly. But I am protecting what remains of my money. The card has been canceled. All access has been removed. The bank is issuing fraud alerts to the credit bureaus. Michael seemed to shrink in his chair. Jessica's going to be furious. Jessica's feelings are not my primary concern right now. After Michael left with his copy of the agreement, Evelyn squeezed Margaret's hand. You did well, Margaret. Many people wouldn't have the strength to stand up to their own children like this. I didn't think I would need to, Margaret admitted quietly. That's the part that hurts the most. Hector lingered after Evelyn departed, concern evident in his expression. Mrs. Hayes, is there anything else I can do? Margaret considered the question. This young man who had once been a boy in her sewing workshop, who had grown into someone who recognized a wrong and acted to stop it. someone who remembered kindness and returned it years later. "You've done more than enough already, Hector. You saved what remains of my savings. I won't forget that." "You saved me once, too," he replied simply. "When my mother couldn't afford my school supplies, and you not only fixed our clothes for free, but slipped those books and pencils into the bags. You probably thought I didn't notice." Margaret smiled slightly. "You were an observant child." "I still am, and I observe that you might need someone to look out for your interests right now." He handed her a business card, different from the one he'd given her at the dealership. "My sister's a lawyer who specializes in elder financial abuse cases, just in case the agreement isn't honored." The bank meeting proceeded with clinical efficiency. Margaret's account was secured, all unauthorized users removed, and a fraud investigation initiated. The manager, a woman about Michael's age, handled everything with a mixture of professionalism and personal concern. Unfortunately, Mrs. Hayes recovering funds from transactions older than 60 days can be challenging, especially when the card was physically provided to the individuals in question. Margaret had expected as much. "I understand. That's why I've established a separate repayment agreement." "Smart move," the manager nodded approvingly. "Too many people in your situation let family relationships prevent them from protecting themselves." As Margaret left the bank, her phone chimed with an incoming text from Jessica. "How dare you humiliate Michael like this, after everything we've done for you?" The audacity of it, claiming they had done something for her when they had been systematically draining her resources, momentarily stole Margaret's breath. She deleted the message without responding. Back at her shop, Margaret threw herself into work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. Each stitch was an act of control in a world that suddenly seemed unpredictable. Each completed alteration a small victory when so much had been lost. Evening brought another text, this time from Michael. "Jessica's left. Took her things and went to her sister's. Says she won't come back unless I tear up the agreement." Margaret stared at the message for a long time before responding. "That's between you and Jessica." The phone rang almost immediately. Michael's voice carried a desperation she hadn't heard before. "Mom, what am I supposed to do? She's my wife." "And I'm your mother," Margaret replied quietly. "The woman who worked 60-hour weeks to put food on your table and clothes on your back. Who went without so you could have what you needed. Who trusted you with access to her life savings for emergencies only." Silence stretched across the line. "You have a choice to make, Michael. A difficult one, I acknowledge that. But it is your choice, not mine." After they hung up, Margaret sat in her quiet kitchen, staring at the refrigerator still adorned with magnets Michael had made in elementary school. So many years, so many sacrifices, so many hopes invested in her only child. And now this chasm between them carved by betrayal and money and Jessica's influence. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Margaret opened it to find Michael standing there, his expression a mixture of shame and resolve. "I tore up the agreement," he said without preamble. Margaret's heart sank. "I see. Because I want to write a new one, just between you and me." Michael held out a handwritten document. "Jessica's spending was her choice, but I let it happen. I'm responsible. These are my terms, harsher than what you proposed. I'll sell my car, take a second job, do whatever it takes." Margaret took the paper, reading Michael's earnest handwriting outlining a plan even more stringent than what Evelyn had drafted. "What about Jessica?" "I don't know," Michael admitted, his voice catching. "I love her, Mom, but what she did, what we did, was wrong. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." For the first time since discovering the theft, Margaret felt a glimmer of hope. Not for the money. She had made peace with possibly never seeing much of it again. But for her son. For the values she and Robert had tried to instill. "Come inside," she said softly. "We have a lot to talk about." The sunlight filtering through Margaret's kitchen window cast a warm glow on the new agreement spread across the table. She traced her finger along Michael's handwritten terms, more stringent than what she had initially proposed. The gesture, however inadequate to repair the damage, represented a first step toward accountability. "I'll move back in with you temporarily." Michael stood by the sink, his wedding ring conspicuously absent. "Jessica's frozen me out of our accounts, says she's consulting her own lawyer." Margaret folded the agreement carefully. "That's not necessary. This is between us, but you need your own space to figure things out." "Mom, I don't just want to pay back the money. I need to understand how I let this happen." Michael's voice cracked slightly. Dad would be so ashamed of me. The mention of Robert sent a pang through Margaret's chest. Your father believed in redemption, in fixing mistakes, not just regretting them. 3 days had passed since Michael's confession and Jessica's departure. 3 days of tense phone calls, tearful conversations, and hard truths. Margaret had watched her son grapple with the realization that his marriage had been built on something less solid than he'd believed. The chime of Margaret's phone interrupted them. A text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You've poisoned my marriage. You'll regret interfering. Margaret showed the screen to Michael, whose face darkened. Jessica, this is getting out of hand. Block the number. Margaret deleted the message with a steady finger. Whatever happens between you two needs to stay between you two. But separating the issues wasn't as simple as Margaret hoped. That afternoon, she arrived at her alteration shop to find the front window smashed glass scattered across the floor like diamond dust. Nothing appeared stolen, just deliberate destruction. Officer Reyes took photographs while Margaret assessed the damage. Any idea who might have done this, Mrs. Hayes? Margaret thought of the threatening text of Jessica's cold fury. I have my suspicions, but no proof. Family trouble. Officer Reyes had the perceptive eyes of someone who'd seen too many domestic disputes spill into public spaces. Something like that. The officer handed her a card. File a report if anything else happens. Immediately. Hector Morales arrived as the police were leaving, concern etched in his expression. Mrs. Hayes, I came as soon as I heard. Do you need help cleaning up? Together they swept glass and boarded the window. Margaret worked methodically, compartmentalizing her emotions the way she'd done after Robert's death. Practical problems first, feelings later. Jessica did this. Hector's statement wasn't a question. Michael told me about the situation when he came to sell his car at the dealership yesterday. He's worried about you. Margaret paused, broom in hand. Michael sold his car, the Mercedes. Took a significant loss, but he was determined to start making payments as quickly as possible. Hector's eyes softened. He's trying, Mrs. Hayes. The knowledge settled in Margaret's chest like a warm stone. Thank you for telling me that. After Hector left, Margaret locked up the damaged shop and walked the 6 blocks to her house. The exercise helped clear her mind, organize her thoughts. One step at a time, just like piecing together a complex garment. She was halfway home when a luxury SUV pulled alongside her. The window lowered to reveal Jessica designer sunglasses perched on her perfect nose despite the fading daylight. Get in. We need to talk. Jessica's tone suggested this wasn't a request. Margaret continued walking. I have nothing to say to you. Then you can listen. Jessica kept pace with the car rolling slowly beside Margaret. Michael's throwing away our marriage over money. Money that would have been his eventually anyway. Margaret stopped, turning to face the vehicle. Is that what you tell yourself, that stealing from me was just accessing an early inheritance? Don't be dramatic. We borrowed some money without going through formal channels. People do it all the time. Jessica's manicured fingers tapped impatiently on the steering wheel. You're using this to drive a wedge between us. No, Jessica. Your actions drove that wedge. Margaret resumed, walking her pace steady. If you want to speak with me, you can do it after you've returned what you took. Jessica accelerated suddenly, the SUV surging ahead before screeching to a halt directly in Margaret's path. She emerged from the driver's side, her cream-colored dress replaced by an expensive-looking pantsuit that probably cost more than Margaret's monthly income. Listen to me, you self-righteous old woman. Jessica's carefully constructed facade had crumbled entirely. I built a life with Michael. I elevated him beyond anything you could have imagined for him, and I will not let you ruin that. Margaret stood her ground, decades of quiet strength holding her steady. You built that life with stolen money. My money. It should have been ours. Michael is your only child. All that money sitting in an account while we struggled. Margaret couldn't contain a short, disbelieving laugh. In your 5-bedroom house with your luxury cars and designer clothes, that kind of struggle? Jessica stepped closer, her perfume an expensive cloud around them. You think you know everything. You have no idea what Michael and I have been dealing with. Then enlighten me. Michael's company is downsizing. He was demoted 3 months ago, salary cut by 30%. He was too ashamed to tell you. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Your precious, successful son was falling apart and you didn't even notice. The revelation struck Margaret like a physical blow. Michael demoted, in trouble, Why hadn't he come to her? That doesn't justify theft. Margaret kept her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. If Michael needed help, he could have asked. And damage his pride, the golden boy admitting failure to Mommy? Jessica scoffed. Besides, we didn't think of it as theft. More like an advance on what would eventually be his. My money is not Michael's inheritance. It's my security. Margaret stepped around Jessica, continuing toward home. And you're not entitled to a penny of it. Jessica called after her. This isn't over. You'll regret turning my husband against me. Margaret didn't look back, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Jessica's words about Michael's job troubles lingered in her mind. Had she been so absorbed in her routines, her work, her solitary life that she'd missed signs of her son's struggles? At home, Margaret poured herself a rare glass of wine and called Michael. Jessica found me on my way home. Margaret skipped any preamble. She mentioned problems at your job. Why didn't you tell me? Michael's sigh whispered through the phone. It's not your burden to carry. I'm dealing with it. By letting Jessica spend my retirement fund. No, God, no. Michael's voice cracked. I don't have an excuse, Mom. I was desperate to maintain the lifestyle Jessica expected. To be the successful son you and Dad sacrificed for. I failed everyone. The raw pain in his voice reached through Margaret's protective shell, touching the mother, who would still do anything to ease her child's suffering. You haven't failed, Michael. You've made a terrible mistake, but you're facing it. That's not failure. Margaret took a steadying breath. Come over for dinner tomorrow. We'll talk properly. After they hung up, Margaret sat in the growing darkness, contemplating what Jessica had revealed. Not just about Michael's job, but about her own role as a mother. Had her determination to raise a self-sufficient son inadvertently made him feel he couldn't come to her with problems? Had her pride in his success put pressure on him to maintain appearances at any cost? The questions circled without resolution as Margaret prepared for bed. She had just turned off the lights when her phone chimed with an email notification. The sender's name made her freeze. Victoria Reynolds, Jessica's sister. The message was brief but chilling. Margaret, you should know Jessica plans to file for emergency guardianship over you, claiming cognitive decline and financial mismanagement. She has fabricated evidence of confusion and memory issues. Protect yourself. I cannot stand by while she does this. Sleep eluded Margaret that night. Jessica's plan was as audacious as it was cruel, attempting to seize legal control over Margaret's life by painting her as incompetent. The sheer calculation of it sent ice through her veins. Morning brought a call from Michael. Mom, Jessica's not backing down. She's hired a lawyer who specializes in elder law. Says she's going to prove you're incapable of managing your finances. Margaret had spent the sleepless night formulating her response. Then I'll prove otherwise. Tell Jessica her sister contacted me. I know what she's planning. Victoria reached out to you. Michael sounded genuinely shocked. They've barely spoken since our wedding. Apparently, there are lines even Victoria won't cross. Margaret moved through her kitchen with purpose, making coffee with the same precision she applied to everything. I need you to be honest with me, Michael. Did you ever tell Jessica I was having memory problems or confusion? The pause before his answer told Margaret everything. Jessica asked me about your memory a few months ago. Said she noticed you repeating yourself, forgetting conversations. I said you sometimes seemed a bit confused about dates. Michael's voice was heavy with realization. She was laying groundwork, wasn't she? Yes. The single word carried the weight of betrayal. She was. Margaret spent the morning on the phone, first with her doctor, scheduling a comprehensive cognitive assessment, then with Evelyn for legal advice, and finally with Hector's sister, Lucia Morales, the lawyer he'd recommended. Lucia's office was in a converted Victorian downtown, the interior, a blend of historic charm and modern efficiency. The lawyer herself projected competence and warmth, her handshake firm as she greeted Margaret. Hector spoke highly of you, Mrs. Hayes. He said you changed the trajectory of his life. Margaret settled into a comfortable chair across from Lucia's desk. He gives me too much credit. All I did was show kindness to a child who needed it. Sometimes that's all it takes. Lucia opened a notebook. Now tell me about this guardianship threat. For the next hour, Margaret laid out the entire situation, the emergency card, the unauthorized spending, Michael's confession, Jessica's threats, and now this plan to have Margaret declared incompetent. Lucia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Margaret finished, the lawyer's expression was grave but determined. This is elder financial abuse, plain and simple. Jessica's guardianship attempt is particularly concerning. It's a tactic used by abusers to gain legal control over their victims' assets. Lucia set down her pen. But we have several advantages. First, you've already documented the unauthorized transactions. Second, Victoria's warning gives us advance notice of Jessica's plans. Third, you're clearly competent, something a proper evaluation will confirm. Margaret nodded, grateful for the lawyer's clear-eyed assessment. What should I do now? Complete that cognitive assessment immediately. Gather character references from long-term acquaintances, people who interact with you regularly and can attest to your mental acuity. Secure your important documents somewhere Jessica cannot access them. Lucia leaned forward. And document everything. Every interaction, every threat, every strange occurrence. Jessica has shown she's willing to go to extraordinary lengths. Margaret left the office with a plan not just to defend herself, but to counterattack if necessary. The seamstress who had spent decades creating order from chaos felt a familiar determination settling over her. That evening, as Margaret prepared dinner for Michael's visit, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, she saw not Michael, but a middle-aged woman in professional attire, accompanied by a uniformed police officer. Mrs. Hayes, I'm Diane Wilkins from Adult Protective Services. We've received a report of possible elder abuse and self-neglect. May we come in? Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. Of course. The home inspection was thorough and humiliating. Ms. Wilkins examined Margaret's refrigerator medicine cabinet and financial records. She asked probing questions about Margaret's daily routines, her social connections, whether she ever felt confused or disoriented. Mrs. Hayes, do you know what day it is today? Ms. Wilkins' tone was gentle but clinical. Wednesday, May 15th. And this is an evaluation triggered by my daughter-in-law, Jessica Hayes, who recently attempted to purchase an $85,000 car with my credit card without permission. Margaret met the social worker's gaze directly. She's now trying to have me declared incompetent to avoid consequences for stealing $250,000 from my accounts. Yes. Wilkins' professional neutrality slipped momentarily, revealing surprise. That's a very serious allegation. One I can document extensively. Margaret retrieved the folder containing bank statements, her agreement with Michael, and notes from her meeting with Lucia. I've retained legal counsel and scheduled a comprehensive cognitive assessment with Dr. Stephen Richards for tomorrow morning. The inspection concluded with Ms. Wilkins making careful notes. We're required to investigate all reports, Mrs. Hayes. Based on what I've observed, there are no immediate concerns about your welfare or capacity. After they left, Margaret sank onto the sofa, her hands trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Jessica's campaign was escalating faster than she'd anticipated. Michael arrived 30 minutes later, his expression darkening when Margaret described the APS visit. Jessica did this. She called yesterday asking for your doctor's information, claiming she wanted to coordinate your care. I refused. She's desperate. Margaret poured tea with hands that had steadied themselves through force of will. Desperate people are dangerous. I'm so sorry, Mom. This is all my fault. Michael stared into his cup. If I'd been stronger, seen Jessica for who she really was. Margaret shook her head. We can't rewrite the past, Michael, but we can determine what happens next. Over dinner, Michael revealed more about the state of his marriage and career. The company restructuring that had led to his demotion. Jessica's increasing dissatisfaction with their lifestyle adjustments. The arguments about money and status that had become their primary form of communication. She wasn't always like this. Michael pushed food around his plate. When we first met, Jessica was ambitious but kind, determined but thoughtful. Somewhere along the way, it became all about appearances, about what we had versus what her friends had. Margaret listened, seeing her son clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. Not the successful engineer she'd proudly told her friends about, but a man caught in a marriage and career that had become traps of expectation and performance. What do you want, Michael? Not what Jessica wants or what you think I want. What do you want? Michael looked up the question, seeming to catch him off guard. I don't know anymore. I've spent so long trying to be what everyone expected. The vulnerability in his admission sparked a memory. Michael at 17, torn between pursuing engineering like his father had always dreamed and exploring his own interest in teaching. Margaret and Robert had encouraged the practical path, wanting security for their son. Had that been the beginning of Michael's disconnection from his own desires? Then perhaps that's what you need to figure out. Margaret reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Before you can decide about Jessica, about your career, about anything. Their conversation was interrupted by Margaret's phone, Lucia Morales calling with urgent news. Mrs. Hayes, Jessica has filed for an emergency guardianship hearing. She's claiming you're in immediate danger due to cognitive decline and financial exploitation by Michael. Lucia's voice was tense. The hearing is set for Monday. That's only 3 days away. Margaret's mind raced through implications. Can she really do this? She's attempting to use an emergency provision that bypasses normal procedural timelines. It rarely succeeds without substantial evidence, but we need to prepare immediately. Keys clicked in the background as Lucia spoke. Can you come to my office tomorrow after your cognitive assessment? After ending the call, Margaret relayed the development to Michael, whose face had gone ashen. She's really going through with it. She's trying to take control of your life. Michael ran a hand through his hair. This is insane. No, it's calculated, Margaret corrected. Jessica knows she's facing potential criminal charges for the credit card fraud. This is her attempt to reframe the narrative, make me the incompetent one, and herself the concerned daughter-in-law. Michael stood abruptly. I need to talk to her. Make her stop this. That might make things worse, Margaret cautioned. Jessica clearly feels cornered. If you confront her, I have to try. Michael was already reaching for his keys. She's gone too far. After Michael left, Margaret called Evelyn, needing the steady presence of her oldest friend. While waiting for Evelyn to arrive, she methodically gathered documents for tomorrow's meetings, financial records, medical history, the journal she'd kept since Robert's death, where she recorded daily activities and reflections. The cognitive assessment the next morning was grueling but thorough. Dr. Richards, a neurologist specializing in geriatric care, administered a battery of tests evaluating memory, reasoning, language skills, and executive function. Mrs. Hayes, based on today's evaluation, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment. Dr. Richards reviewed his notes. In fact, your performance on several measures was above average for your age group. Relief washed through Margaret. Will you document that formally? I'm facing a guardianship hearing on Monday. The doctor's eyebrows rose. A guardianship petition. That's unusual given your results. I'll prepare a comprehensive report immediately. Lucia received the news with satisfaction when Margaret arrived at her office later that morning. Excellent. This will be crucial evidence. Now let's discuss our strategy for Monday. They were reviewing documentation when Lucia's assistant interrupted. Ms. Morales, there's a Michael Hayes here. Says he's Mrs. Hayes' son. Michael entered, looking haggard as if he hadn't slept. Mom, Jessica's completely lost it. When I confronted her about the guardianship petition, she threatened to report me for elder abuse. Said she'd claim I coerced you into giving me money. Lucia's expression remained professional, but alert. Did she make this threat via text or email? Do you have documentation? No, it was in person at her sister's house, but Victoria heard everything. She's willing to provide a statement. Michael sank into a chair. Jessica also revealed she has copies of Mom's medical records going back years. I don't know how she obtained them. Likely through deception. Lucia made a note. We'll add medical privacy violations to our counterclaims. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Margaret provided Lucia with contact information for character witnesses, her doctor long-term clients, church friends, the bank manager who had helped freeze her accounts. Michael worked with Victoria to document Jessica's threats and admissions. On Sunday evening, Margaret sat on her back porch watching fireflies rise from the garden Robert had planted. Tomorrow she would stand in a courtroom and defend her competence, her autonomy, her right to control her own life. The injustice of it burned beneath her calm exterior. I won't be made invisible in my own life, she whispered to the gathering darkness. I won't be pushed aside as inconvenient. Monday morning dawned clear and warm. Margaret dressed with particular care in a tailored navy suit she had made herself, her silver hair arranged neatly, a single strand of pearls, Robert's last anniversary gift, at her neck. Armor of a different sort than she had ever imagined needing. The courthouse was the imposing limestone building downtown. Lucia met Margaret and Michael at the entrance, professional and reassuring in a charcoal pantsuit. Remember, emergency guardianship petitions have a high burden of proof. Jessica needs to demonstrate immediate danger, not just vague concerns. Inside the designated courtroom, Margaret saw Jessica for the first time since their confrontation on the street. She sat beside an older male attorney, her posture perfect, her expression a masterclass in concerned solicitude. When she noticed Margaret, a flash of something calculation worry crossed her features before being replaced by a practiced smile. Judge Elizabeth Hartman entered, a woman perhaps a decade younger than Margaret, with silver-streaked dark hair and perceptive eyes. "Good morning. We're here regarding Petition 247A, Jessica Hayes seeking emergency guardianship over Margaret Hayes on grounds of diminished capacity and vulnerability to financial exploitation." Jessica's attorney rose first, presenting their case with smooth confidence. "Your Honor, my client has observed concerning patterns of memory loss, confusion, and financial mismanagement in her mother-in-law. Recently, Mrs. Hayes accused her son and daughter-in-law of stealing money that she had previously agreed they could access. She's become paranoid, antagonistic toward family trying to help her." Margaret listened, amazed at how reality could be twisted, reshaped into something unrecognizable. In Jessica's narrative, the emergency card had been given with explicit permission for general use. The confrontation at the car dealership became Margaret's confusion about prior agreements. Her demand for repayment transformed into persecution of her loving family. "Most concerning," Jessica's lawyer continued, "Mrs. Hayes has recently fallen under the influence of her son Michael, who has manipulated her into signing a document transferring significant assets to him, a classic case of undue influence facilitated by cognitive vulnerability." Michael stiffened beside Margaret at this outright lie. Lucia squeezed Margaret's arm in silent warning to remain calm. When their turn came, Lucia approached the bench with measured confidence. "Your Honor, the petition before you isn't just meritless, it's a deliberate attempt to weaponize guardianship laws to avoid accountability for financial crimes." She methodically dismantled Jessica's narrative, presenting bank records showing the unauthorized transactions, Dr. Richards' cognitive assessment results, and statements from multiple character witnesses attesting to Margaret's lucidity and independence. Mrs. Hayes isn't a confused elderly woman being taken advantage of by her son. She's the victim of significant financial exploitation by her daughter-in-law, who, when caught, concocted this guardianship petition as a desperate countermeasure. Lucia called Hector Morales to testify about the car dealership incident, then Victoria Reynolds, Jessica's own sister, who described Jessica's admission about fabricating evidence of Margaret's confusion. Throughout the proceedings, Margaret sat straight-backed and attentive, meeting Judge Hartman's evaluative glances with clear-eyed dignity. When finally called to speak, she approached the stand with the quiet assurance that had carried her through 71 years of challenges. "Mrs. Hayes, in your own words, please explain your current situation and why you believe this guardianship petition has been filed." Judge Hartman's tone was neutral, but not unkind. Margaret folded her hands on the railing, her voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, I'm a widow who worked as a seamstress for 40 years. My husband and I saved carefully to ensure I wouldn't be a burden to our son in my old age. 8 months ago, I discovered my daughter-in-law had been using my emergency credit card without permission, spending approximately $250,000 on luxury items." She detailed the discovery, the confrontation, Michael's confession, and subsequent efforts to make amends. "When I insisted on repayment and accountability, Jessica escalated to threats, property damage, and now this guardianship petition. This isn't about my cognitive health, it's about silencing me and gaining control of my remaining assets." Jessica's attorney cross-examined aggressively, trying to trip Margaret up with rapid-fire questions about dates, amounts, and sequences of events. Margaret answered each precisely, without hesitation or confusion. "Mrs. Hayes, if you're so mentally sharp, how did you fail to notice $250,000 missing from your accounts for 8 months? The question dripped with condescension. Margaret met his gaze evenly. "I placed my trust in my son. The emergency card was rarely used, and I didn't monitor it closely because it was intended for genuine emergencies, not regular expenses. That was my mistake, trusting too completely. It won't happen again." By the time final arguments concluded, even Jessica's practiced composure had cracked. She whispered furiously to her attorney, her expression cycling between indignation and worry. Judge Hartman reviewed her notes briefly before delivering her ruling. "Having considered the evidence presented, I find no basis whatsoever for an emergency guardianship. Mrs. Hayes has demonstrated clear cognitive competence, financial literacy, and appropriate decision-making capacity." Relief washed through Margaret like a physical force as the judge continued. Furthermore, I'm deeply concerned by what appears to be an abuse of guardianship provisions to intimidate Mrs. Hayes following her legitimate efforts to recover misappropriated funds. I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential financial exploitation charges. Jessica stood abruptly. This is outrageous. We were trying to help Mrs. Hayes, control your client. Judge Hartman's voice cut through Jessica's protest. This court has ruled. Petition denied. Outside the courthouse, beneath a sky impossibly blue and clear, Margaret took her first deep breath in days. It's over. Lucia shook her head slightly. The guardianship threat is over, but Jessica may still face criminal charges for the financial exploitation. And there's your civil claim for the stolen funds. One battle at a time. Margaret's shoulders straightened, decades of quiet resilience in the gesture. Today I protected my autonomy. Tomorrow we'll address the rest. Michael stood slightly apart, his expression a complex mixture of relief and shame. Mom, I don't know how to make this right. You've started already, Margaret told him simply, by choosing truth over comfort, by standing with me today instead of with Jessica's lies. That evening, Margaret sat in her garden among Robert's roses, a cup of tea cooling beside her, as twilight gathered. The victory felt substantial but incomplete. She had defended her right to control her own life, but the breach of trust with Michael remained a wound still healing. Jessica's betrayal had revealed fault lines in their family. She hadn't recognized Michael's career struggles, his inability to communicate honestly about problems, her own failure to see beyond the successful facade he presented. Her phone chimed with a text from Michael. Jessica's been served with divorce papers. It's really over. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling not triumph but a complicated sorrow. A marriage ended. A family fractured. Trust betrayed and painfully rebuilt. All the invisible costs of standing up for herself. We choose our battles by recognizing which losses we can survive, she whispered to the gathering darkness words Robert had often said during difficult times. And which ones would destroy us if we surrendered? She would survive this. They both would. Altered perhaps, but not destroyed. Autumn painted Margaret's neighborhood in shades of amber and gold, the seasonal transformation mirroring the changes in her own life. 3 months had passed since the courtroom victory. 3 months of rebuilding, reconciling, and reimagining what the future might hold. The emergency guardianship threat had been neutralized, but the consequences continued to ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. Margaret adjusted the sling supporting her left arm as she stepped carefully through her front door. The diagnosis had arrived 2 weeks after the court hearing, stage 2 breast cancer requiring immediate surgery. The lump she'd ignored during the chaos with Michael and Jessica could no longer be dismissed. The operation had gone well, her prognosis cautiously optimistic. But recovery demanded patience, a quality Margaret possessed in abundance. The irony wasn't lost on her. The money Jessica had attempted to steal would now fund the medical treatments Margaret had always feared might deplete her savings. Life's circular patterns often revealed themselves in unexpected moments. Michael arrived promptly at 6, carrying groceries, and the determined expression of a man on a mission of atonement. He'd taken to visiting daily since her surgery, cooking meals, handling household chores, driving her to medical appointments. Today, he brought fresh flowers, chrysanthemums in autumn hues that matched the season. Dr. Patel called with your latest results. Michael arranged the flowers in a vase while Margaret settled into her favorite armchair. The margins are clear, no signs of spreading. Relief softened the lines around Margaret's eyes. The cancer had been another battle she hadn't anticipated fighting, arriving just when she thought the worst was behind them. Have you heard anything from Jessica's attorney? Margaret watched Michael's shoulders tense at the question. They've agreed to mediation for the divorce settlement. Jessica's dropped her claim to the house, but she's demanding half of my retirement accounts plus alimony. Michael placed the vase on the coffee table. Lucia says we can counter with evidence of financial misconduct, but it gets complicated. The divorce proceedings had turned predictably acrimonious. Jessica, facing possible criminal charges for the credit card fraud, had leveraged every advantage to position herself as a victim. Her social media accounts portrayed a heartbroken wife abandoned during a difficult time. Mutual friends had chosen sides most unaware of the theft that had precipitated the separation. The district attorney's office called this morning. Margaret adjusted her position to ease the discomfort in her chest. They're offering Jessica a plea deal, restitution and probation instead of jail time if she admits to unauthorized use of the card. Michael's expression reflected conflicting emotions: relief that Jessica might avoid imprisonment, disappointment at the leniency of potential consequences. Will you accept that after everything she did? Margaret considered the question carefully. The anger that had fueled her through the guardianship battle had gradually transmuted into something more complex, not forgiveness exactly, but a desire to move forward rather than remain tethered to past injuries. I'm more interested in recovering the money than seeing Jessica punished. If restitution is part of the agreement, I'll support it. The remainder of the evening passed comfortably as they shared dinner and discussed mundane matters, a welcome reprieve from legal strategies and medical concerns. Michael seemed different these days, more present in their conversations, less guarded about his struggles. The armor of success he'd maintained for years had cracked, revealing the vulnerable human beneath. After Michael left, Margaret sat alone with her thoughts, contemplating the house that had sheltered her family for nearly 4 decades. The 2-story colonial, with its familiar creaks and character, suddenly felt outsized for her needs. Too many rooms to clean, too many stairs to navigate, too many memories haunting the corners. The practical seamstress, who had always valued functionality over sentiment, recognized it was time for a change. Margaret scheduled an appointment with a real estate agent for the following week. The decision crystallized a shift in her thinking from preserving the past to actively shaping her future, however many years remained. The realtor, Denise Cavanaugh, arrived precisely on time, her professional demeanor softened by genuine warmth. Mrs. Hayes, your home has excellent bones. With minimal updates, we could list it competitively in this market. They toured the property together, Denise making notes while Margaret shared historical context. The kitchen Robert had renovated himself, the backyard oak tree planted when Michael started kindergarten, the study where she'd managed household accounts with meticulous care. What are you looking for in your next home? Denise asked as they completed the tour. The question gave Margaret pause. What did she want? After decades of considering others' needs, Robert's, Michael's, her clients', the freedom to choose solely for herself felt almost disorienting. Something smaller, one level, modern amenities but with character, a community where I won't be isolated. The words came more easily than Margaret expected. A place where I can start fresh. Denise showed her listings for several condominiums in a nearby development designed for active seniors. The units featured accessible designs, community spaces, and proximity to Margaret's church and alteration shop. One particular listing caught her attention, a corner unit with large windows overlooking a small pond and walking trail. I'd like to see this one, Margaret pointed to the listing. As soon as possible. 3 days later, Margaret stood in the empty condominium sunlight streaming through windows that framed views of fall foliage reflected in still water. The space felt right, neither too large nor too confining, modern, without being sterile, a blank canvas awaiting her imprint. I'll take it, she told Denise with quiet certainty. The decision made, Margaret's practical nature took over. She created lists, schedules, and budgets for the transition. Her alteration shop would need temporary management during her recovery and move. The house required minor repairs before listing. 4 decades of accumulated possessions demanded sorting: what to keep, what to sell, what to donate. Michael reacted to the news with mixed emotions. Are you sure about this, Mom? The house has so many memories. Memories don't disappear when you change addresses. Margaret sorted through kitchen utensils with methodical efficiency. They travel with you, but so does the weight of maintaining spaces you no longer need. Together they began the process of dismantling the life Margaret and Robert had built. Each room contained its own archaeology of family history. Michael's growth chart penciled on the pantry doorframe, Robert's collection of woodworking tools in the garage, Margaret's first sewing machine stored reverently in the attic. Michael took photographs of meaningful features before they disappeared, creating a digital archive of the home he'd grown up in. The physical labor of sorting and packing proved challenging with Margaret's limited mobility from surgery. Neighbors and church friends organized a weekend work party, filling the house with the busy hum of cooperative effort. Among the volunteers was Hector Morales, who arrived with coffee and pastries for everyone. Mrs. Hayes, my mother would never forgive me if I didn't help the woman who taught me to read. Hector took on the task of boxing Robert's workshop tools with special care. While cleaning out Margaret's home office, Michael discovered a dusty folder labeled Michael College, tucked behind financial records. Inside lay dozens of scholarship applications Margaret had completed in her precise handwriting, along with rejection letters, financial aid forms, and finally the acceptance and grant package from State University. "Mom, did you apply for all these scholarships for me?" Michael flipped through pages yellowed with age. Margaret glanced at the folder memories surfacing of late nights at the kitchen table, completing applications after finishing sewing orders, determined to give her son opportunities neither she nor Robert had enjoyed. "You were busy with senior projects and sports. Your father and I wanted to make sure you had options." The depth of sacrifice hidden within that simple statement hung in the air between them. So many parental efforts rendered invisible by time and routine expectations. As the sorting continued, Margaret found herself increasingly drawn to items that represented possibility rather than history fabric she'd been saving for future projects. Books she'd intended to read, the travel guides for places she and Robert had planned to visit after retirement. The dreams deferred by circumstance and loss. "You don't need to get rid of everything, Mom." Michael watched as Margaret hesitated over a box of travel books. "I'm not discarding dreams, just changing how they might look." Margaret placed the guidebooks in her keep pile. "Some journeys happen later than we expect." The liquidation of excess possessions progressed steadily. Margaret held a carefully organized estate sale, transforming decades of accumulation into funds for her new beginning. The process felt less painful than she'd anticipated, each item released, creating space for whatever might come next. By mid-November, the colonial house was under contract with a young family expecting their first child. Margaret found poetic rightness in the cycle. A home that had sheltered her family would nurture another generation through their own milestones and challenges. Moving day arrived with unexpected emotions. Margaret stood in the empty living room where Christmas trees had brightened winter evenings, where Michael had taken first steps, where Robert had proposed 45 years earlier. The space echoed with the ghost of laughter and conversation. "Ready." Michael appeared in the doorway, car keys in hand. Margaret nodded, taking one last visual inventory before following him outside. The November air carried the promise of winter, crisp and clarifying. "Goodbye, old friend," she whispered to the house as Michael helped her into the passenger seat. The condominium welcomed them with blank walls and unfamiliar dimensions. Michael had arranged for the essential furniture to be delivered and positioned according to Margaret's specifications. Her sewing table occupied pride of place near the largest window where natural light would illuminate detailed work. "It's smaller than I expected." Michael set down the last box in the kitchen. "Not smaller, right-sized," Margaret corrected, already envisioning how the space would adapt to her needs. "No wasted room, no empty corners collecting dust and regrets." The unpacking process revealed unexpected benefits of downsizing. Without the burden of maintaining excess space, Margaret found energy for projects long deferred. She revived her journal-keeping habit, documenting daily observations with renewed attention. She enrolled in a watercolor class offered in the community center adjacent to her building. She joined the condominium association board, contributing her organizational skills to community governance. Physical recovery progressed steadily alongside the establishment of new routines. By Christmas, Margaret had completed radiation therapy and regained most of her arm mobility. The oncologist expressed optimism during her quarterly checkup, noting excellent response to treatment. The holiday season brought its own challenges. The first Christmas away from the family home felt disorienting despite Margaret's practical nature. Michael suggested hosting a small gathering in her new space, inviting Evelyn Hector and his family and a few neighbors Margaret had befriended. "Nothing elaborate," Margaret cautioned as they planned. "Just simple food and good company." The evening exceeded her modest expectations. Hector's children performed improvised Christmas carols. Evelyn brought photo albums documenting decades of friendship. Margaret's new neighbors contributed cultural traditions from their diverse backgrounds. The condominium, initially so unfamiliar, began absorbing new memories to layer over the echoes of the past. As winter deepened, Margaret established a Sunday ritual she called Paper Day, helping other seniors organize and understand their legal and financial documents. The idea had germinated during her own legal battles, recognizing how vulnerability increased when people didn't comprehend the paperwork controlling their lives. "Knowledge isn't just power, it's protection," she explained to her first participants, a retired couple confused by insurance documentation. "You can't defend what you don't understand." Word spread through the senior community. Margaret's living room became an informal workshop each Sunday afternoon, filled with elders bringing complicated forms concerning letters from government agencies, insurance policies with impenetrable language. She didn't offer legal advice, just clarity and organization skills honed through decades of translating sewing patterns into wearable garments. Michael observed these sessions with growing appreciation for his mother's resilience and reinvention. "You've found a new calling," he noted one Sunday evening while helping clean up scattered papers. "Not new, just redirected," Margaret corrected. "I've always created order from confusion. Before it was with fabric, now it's with paperwork." The new year brought progress on legal fronts. Jessica, facing mounting evidence and potential criminal charges, agreed to a structured restitution plan. She would repay the stolen funds over 5 years with payments secured by liens against property she'd retained in the divorce settlement. The district attorney accepted her guilty plea to lesser charges, imposing probation rather than incarceration. Margaret received the first restitution check in February, a modest beginning to the long process of financial recovery. The amount mattered less than the principle established, consequences acknowledged, responsibility assigned. Michael's personal reconstruction continued alongside the legal proceedings. He'd found a therapist specializing in relationship trauma, working through the psychological aftermath of Jessica's manipulation and betrayal. His career had stabilized at a smaller engineering firm with less prestige but greater satisfaction. The demotion that had once seemed catastrophic had ultimately steered him toward work better aligned with his values. One Tuesday evening in early spring, Michael arrived for dinner with uncharacteristic nervousness, checking his watch repeatedly. "Is everything all right?" Margaret set plates on her small dining table, noting his distraction. "I invited someone to join us." Michael glanced toward the door. "I hope that's okay." Before Margaret could inquire further, a gentle knock announced their guest. Michael opened the door to reveal a woman approximately his age with warm brown eyes and a tentative smile. Her simple dress and minimal jewelry contrasted sharply with Jessica's carefully curated glamour. "Mom, this is Christine. She teaches 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary." Margaret welcomed the visitor with genuine curiosity. Michael hadn't mentioned dating since finalizing his divorce 3 months earlier. Christine's presence represented another step in his healing process, tentative but significant. Dinner conversation flowed with surprising ease. Christine spoke passionately about educational equity and her students' achievements. She asked thoughtful questions about Margaret's Paper Day initiative. She complimented the meal without the affected enthusiasm Jessica had often employed. Most strikingly, Christine related to Michael as a partner rather than an accessory. They exchanged glances containing private communications, finished each other's thoughts without interrupting, displayed the comfortable synchronicity of people who recognized each other's inherent value. After Christine departed with plans to return the following weekend, Margaret watched Michael carefully wash dishes at her kitchen sink. "She's lovely. Genuine." Michael nodded, a smile softening his features. "We're taking things slowly. Both been through enough to know rushing leads nowhere good." The wisdom in his approach suggested growth Margaret had quietly hoped for, but hadn't dared expect. Michael was building not just a new relationship, but a new understanding of what partnership should entail, mutual respect, rather than performance, authenticity, rather than image. Spring advanced toward summer, bringing physical renewal that matched Margaret's circumstantial rebirth. Her radiation burns healed completely. Her energy returned in steady increments. Her medical prognosis improved from cautiously optimistic to confidently favorable. The cancer experience, while never welcome, had crystallized her priorities with clarifying urgency. On a particularly beautiful May afternoon, Margaret sat beside the community pond with her watercolor supplies, attempting to capture the interplay of light and shadow on the water's surface. A familiar voice interrupted her concentration. "Mrs. Hayes, is that really you?" She looked up to find Martha Peterson, a contemporary from church circles who had drifted from Margaret's life after Robert's death. Martha settled onto the bench, eyeing the painting with appreciation. "I heard you'd moved, but couldn't picture you anywhere but that beautiful colonial." Martha adjusted her sun hat against the spring sunshine. "How are you managing after everything? The divorce situation with Michael must have been just dreadful." The inquiry, though well-intentioned, carried undertones of curiosity, seeking confirmation of misfortune. Margaret recognized the subtle invitation to commiseration, to position herself as victim of circumstance rather than architect of renewal. "I'm thriving, actually. Margaret added delicate brushstrokes to suggest ripples in the water. Change arrives whether invited or not. The question is what we create from it. Their conversation continued pleasantly enough, but Martha's periodic expressions of sympathy revealed her expectation of finding Margaret diminished by recent events. The disconnect between perception and reality reminded Margaret how profoundly her internal landscape had transformed. The woman others assumed broken by betrayal and illness had instead discovered unexpected strength in her supposed vulnerability. That evening, Margaret found a thick envelope in her mailbox bearing the return address of Jessica's attorney. Inside lay a handwritten letter on expensive stationery alongside the monthly restitution check. Margaret, this isn't an apology. I'm not sure I'm capable of genuine remorse yet, but 6 months of court-mandated therapy has forced me to examine patterns I've spent a lifetime perfecting. The money I took from you was meant to fill something empty inside me. A void no amount of designer clothes or luxury vacations could satisfy. I justified taking it by telling myself Michael deserved it, that you owed him for being your son. The truth is uglier. I've been diagnosed with several conditions that explain but don't excuse my behavior. I'm working to understand why I value things over people, why I measure worth in dollars rather than character. I don't expect forgiveness. I've caused harm I can't undo. But I wanted you to know the restitution payments aren't just court-ordered. They represent my first attempts at making amends for damage that extends beyond financial. Jessica. Margaret read the letter twice before folding it carefully and placing it in her desk drawer. Not an apology, as Jessica had stated, but perhaps something more meaningful, a recognition of harm done in acknowledgement of responsibility, the beginning of accountability without expectation of absolution. She showed the letter to Michael during his next visit. His reaction mixed skepticism with cautious hope. Do you think she means it? Or is this more manipulation? Margaret considered the question seriously. Intent matters less than action at this point. She's paying restitution. She's seeking treatment. The rest is between Jessica and her conscience. By June, the final details of Margaret's transition had fallen into place. Her former home had closed escrow, providing financial cushion beyond her existing savings. Her alteration shop had reopened with modified hours, accommodating her new priorities. Her medical team had transitioned her to annual monitoring rather than active treatment. Most significantly, Margaret had reached a new understanding with Michael, one based on mutual respect rather than idealized expectations. Their weekly dinners had evolved into genuine exchanges rather than performance reports, each revealing authentic challenges and joys rather than curated narratives of success. On the anniversary of the car dealership incident that had initiated their upheaval, Margaret invited Michael and Christine to dinner at her condominium. The evening held no formal acknowledgement of the date's significance, yet awareness of their journey colored the conversation with appreciation for distance traveled. After dinner, they strolled around the pond behind Margaret's building, enjoying the fireflies emerging as twilight descended. Christine excused herself to take a work call, leaving mother and son momentarily alone on the pathway. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined being here. Michael gestured to encompass not just their physical location, but their circumstances. I thought losing Jessica meant losing everything I'd worked for. I couldn't see beyond that fear. Margaret watched a heron glide across the darkening water, its graceful landing barely disturbing the surface. We build our lives around certain anchors, relationships, homes, careers. When those shift, we fear we'll drift entirely away from who we are. But sometimes what feels like drifting is actually finding a truer course. I'm still making payments on your restitution agreement, Michael noted with lingering shame. It'll take another 3 years to repay everything. The money matters less than the commitment to making things right. Margaret linked her arm through her son's as they continued walking. Some debts are measured in dollars, others in trust rebuilt day by day. Christine rejoined them as they completed their circuit around the pond. The three returned to Margaret's condominium for coffee and the blackberry cobbler that had been Robert's favorite dessert. Their conversation wandered through topics mundane and profound: Christine's upcoming school year, Michael's new project at work, Margaret's expanding Paper Day initiative. After their guests departed, Margaret settled on her small balcony to enjoy the summer evening. Her new home felt properly inhabited, now filled with emerging traditions and fresh memories rather than echoes of the past. The condominium complex hummed with gentle nighttime activity, dog walkers completing final rounds, neighbors chatting on adjacent balconies, security lights illuminating communal pathways. From this vantage point, Margaret could see sections of her neighborhood interconnected yet distinct. The seniors' building where she resided, the family apartments across the pond, the assisted living facility at the community's edge, each structure designed for different life stages, yet part of a cohesive whole. The metaphor wasn't lost on Margaret. Her own life had contained distinct chapters: daughter, wife, mother, widow, cancer survivor, community organizer. Each identity connected to the others, yet complete in its particular purpose. The seamstress in her appreciated how disparate pieces could form a unified pattern when properly aligned. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. The alteration shop needed new equipment. Michael and Christine were discussing moving in together, navigating that transition cautiously after his experience with Jessica. The condominium association had invited Margaret to head the community outreach committee, recognizing her natural talent for connecting people with needed resources. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, Margaret allowed herself to appreciate the distance traveled. From the devastation of discovering Jessica's betrayal to the creation of a life more authentic than what had been taken. From the terror of a cancer diagnosis to the measured appreciation for each day's ordinary blessings. From the grief of leaving her family home to the discovery that belonging transcended physical structures. We find our strength not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall, Robert had often said during difficult moments. The wisdom of his words resonated more profoundly now than when he'd first spoken them. Margaret's recent trials hadn't broken her. They'd revealed capacities for resilience, reinvention, and forgiveness she might never have discovered otherwise. A gentle breeze carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the community garden. Margaret closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. This moment, peaceful, ordinary, precious, represented victory more profound than any courtroom vindication. She had reclaimed not just her financial security, but her right to define her own story, to determine her own worth, to choose which battles deserved her energy and which grievances could be released. The life we build from broken pieces often proves stronger than what was originally intended. She whispered to the evening air, the truth of it settling into her bones with the weight of hard-won wisdom. Tomorrow would come with its own demands and delights. Tonight belonged to quiet celebration of the journey completed and anticipation of the path ahead, both equally valuable, both entirely her own.